Hey everyone, welcome back to the Functional Retirement Podcast. I'm your host, Thatcher Taylor. We're going to talk about something that may raise the hairs on the back of your neck, a 100% equity portfolio in retirement. And I know you think I'm crazy by saying that, and I'm not recommending it, but we're going to go over it today together. And I'm going to start with a quote. High portfolio variability can lead to sleepless nights for clients, which can then result in poor investment decisions. That would be exiting the market after a large loss, for example. Therefore, the underlying variability of a portfolio should be considered when selecting the optimal portfolio for a retiree. The underlying variability of a portfolio should be considered when selecting the optimal portfolio of a retiree. So this podcast and subsequent video that I'm going to put on my YouTube channel came from me doing my own homework. I was working on some stuff for myself and my current clients. I was doing my own due diligence to make sure the strategies that I was using for my clients and having the proper investment portfolio in retirement were still valid. Because times have changed. Sometimes what worked 10 or 15 years ago doesn't work now. So my homework and my learning will also be your learning today too. So let's get into it. I'm going to go over some images. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share some images. So if you're listening to this, go to www.propathfinancial.com/post/retirement income /post/retirement income. And you'll see the link in the show notes below or the comments below. So you can see these images. I'm going to try to get these images uploaded if you're not able to watch this on YouTube. The reason for this is because I got to do research. You can't just go into investment methodology kind of guessing. You can't just go into it assuming that you know exactly what to do without updating your research every few years, because the market changes, things change, and distribution from investment portfolios for income and the effective rate without letting the portfolio fail, as in it didn't last long enough, the income didn't last long enough, you ran out of money, needs to be adjusted because all this is looked on past market performance. So remember that past market performance is what a lot of advisors and people use for this. So I just need to reevaluate. We need to go to the research. There's some people that do some very good research, and that's what we're going to go over today. Okay, to help illustrate this is an actual client scenario where a new onboarded client came to me and they're at a point where they want to spend more in retirement. They want to know if they can do it. Right now, they're spending $5,000 a month. They want to spend $7,000 a month. They may want to move into a specific place that increases their expenses, which is fine. They want to know how that plays out. You can see here by just naturally increasing by $2,000. You can see on the right-hand side here, their current plan, how we have it set up with their current assets, with their current liabilities. They have a very high probability of success of living out the rest of their life, spending $5,000 a month with some inflation adjustments. But if we increase by $2,000, that reduces the probability of success down by 14%. But also the amount of assets left at the end of life reduced down by $400,000. To do this effectively, this towards the end of life is going to be a very, very tight squeeze to make sure that they have around $200,000 left. So they're increasing their risk. But here's one thing I want to show you. This comes to our asset allocation question. They right now have 42% of their assets in equities or stocks and 58% of their assets in fixed income, with a lot of it being in cash. Remember the Morningstar article that we're going to go over in just a second. I want you to remember this, 18.4% in cash. We're going to go over a Morningstar article that talks a lot about how their cash assumptions have changed because of how much cash people are receiving or interest they're receiving on their cash in like CDs and money markets. So you have to remember that as we go through this. But if we go back to their retirement situation, This isn't a recommendation, but you can see quickly if I just adjust from their current allocation with basically a very conservative model to a moderate, a 60-40 portfolio. We add the equity exposure. They can spend 2,000 more and they end up with substantially more towards the end of life. And what this means towards the end of life is this plan is based on an assumption of them living at age 90. If they live to 91, 92, 93, this has a buffer for them. They have some extra money laying around. But right now they're using a retirement spending strategy of just inflation adjustments. So let's say today it's $5,000 a month or $60,000 a year. And according to inflation, it's going to be a little bit more next year. And then we're going to take that amount in inflation adjust. So every single year, there's a systematic inflation adjustment, which is $5,000 now, but they want it to be $7,000. What if we incorporated what is a more dynamic spending strategy called the guardrails? If we refresh this, this increases their probability of success substantially. They end up with still less, $180,000 less at their death, passing on to family members or heirs, but their probability of success is extremely high with them spending an additional $24,000 a year. Now, they could potentially do this. I should show you that their net worth in this particular situation is 1.26 million. 600 of that is in a house. You can see here, and then the rest is in invested assets and in the bank. So this is a very possible scenario for them to be able to be successful in retirement by the adjustment of the asset allocation and the income distribution strategy. So let's start here. We're going to set the stage. We're going to utilize some Morningstar research. We're going to use a couple research papers in this discussion today. So as we go through this, here's what I want you to remember. We're going to talk about safe withdrawal rates, which the withdrawal rate is the percentage or the amount of money that can come from your portfolio every single year. The safety depends on what is the probability or the failure rate based on how much you withdraw. If you withdraw too much, your failure rate increases. If you withdraw too little, your failure rate increases, but then you don't spend enough. So there's a balance that we have to find. A lot of this comes down to how much you pull out, how long we think we're going to live, life expectancy, which we'll discuss, which is a very important point of all this, and how risky you are. Some clients want to withdraw a certain amount of money and they want to have a 95% or higher success rate. And we can measure that using Monte Carlo simulations. But some people want to spend a little bit more and are okay with having an 80% success rate or a 20% failure rate in a lot of the scenarios ran. We got to find the balance in between those two segments. So this first article you see here is Morningstar's State of Retirement Income 2023. So it says at the top, stronger fixed income returns. Stronger fixed income returns boost starting safe withdrawal percentage to 4%, their highest level in 3 years. So we're going to take this one with a grain of salt. They're talking about the high yields that you're receiving on cash, CDs, and money markets, which isn't always consistent. But we're going to start this. Morningstar's 2023 research suggests that 4% is the highest safe starting withdrawal rate for retirees spending from an investment portfolio. And that's assuming a 90% probability of having funds remaining at the end of a 30-year retirement period. The figure is the highest starting safe withdrawal rate percentage since Morningstar began creating this research in 2021. We're going to see in a second how this is somewhat inaccurate based on some research that's about 17 years old by an individual that's very, very good at this. The increases come from the interest rates like we discussed, but also some portfolios with different asset allocations and withdrawal strategies matter. So remember I titled this, Can I Support a 100% Equity Portfolio? In some cases, in short, the answer is yeah. Yeah, you could. But it kind of depends on a lot of other factors. But what is the optimal asset allocation for this? Well, that's what we're going to. Okay, as of Morningstar's research, there are a few ways to evaluate how to distribute income. There are a few technical methods on being able to distribute the income. There's the base case, which is basically just 4% per year. There's a tips ladder. There's forego and inflation adjustment. There's just using required minimum distributions, which is an unusual one. There's guardrails, which I love. And then there's actual spending. There are many different ways other than what they just mentioned here that can be used to distribute income, which I'll show you here in just a second. But basically, for each one of these methods, the safe starting withdrawal rate was between 4% and 5.2%, and 5.2% was the highest using the guardrails approach, which is a more dynamic spending strategy. You did with this method, the guardrails at 5.2% starting safe withdrawal rate ended up with a little bit less at retirement deaths or at the end of retirement than the other methods. But that's the trade off. You got to spend more. You got to enjoy your money. You still left a good portion, but the median ending value in millions was 0.8%. That's if you started with $1 million. And then the base case or using the 4% rule was you ended with 1.5 million. So you ended with more money than what you started with, but you spent only 4%. So there's a couple different methods that could be used for this. And I want to go over a couple other methods by someone else's research to describe different ways to distribute your income in retirement. And don't worry, we got to set the stage with all this before we get to the asset allocation, which is going to be the grand finale with this research article that we're going to discuss from 2007. Okay, we've set the stage with a real life example about how the income distribution strategy matters and how the asset allocation matters. We've discussed Morningstar's research, again, how the asset allocation matters and the income distribution strategy matters. But now we're going to dive even deeper. We're going to go further down the rabbit hole and we're going to use an old article from 2007, but it's very, very good research. It's extremely comprehensive and it echoes a lot of what I've talked about already today on which asset allocation is best and could you actually have a 100% equity portfolio. All right, David Blanchett, you are one smart sucker. He has all the letters behind his name, but did a phenomenal amount of research. And this is from 2007. So this was right before the market crash of 2008, 2009, which to be honest with you, after 2008, 2009, 2010 to basically 2020, the market went on a 10-year tear. So these numbers might even look better. So we're going to use this when we're having a really, really bad decade. This is specifically finding the proper allocation strategy for distributing portfolios. Okay. It says right here, the purpose of this paper is to determine the optimal allocation strategy for a portfolio subject to withdrawals. Most of you listening are going to have a pile of assets that you're going to need to help distribute to supplement your income in retirement. So there's a couple things that we need to go through first. Life expectancy. Before exploring sustainable real withdrawal rates, it is important to establish a method to determine the length of a retirement distribution period. So, for example, let's say you're 75 right now. On average, if you live to age 75, you're going to live most like there's a very high probability that you're going to live to 85 or longer. Very high probability, especially if you're married, you have a spouse. If you're 75 now, living to 85 or longer has a very high probability. But if you're 55, your probability of living long is still very high likelihood you're getting to 75. And if you get to 75, you're going to live another 10 or 15 years like we just discussed. So we got to set up a potential life expectancy to set up the proper withdrawal strategy because how long you distribute these funds matters. Let's just say 30 years or more is the period of time. It's kind of a general round number that people like to use. Say you retired at 60, you're going to get to 90, or 65, you're going to get to 95, especially with people living longer now. You can see right here for married couples, the probability of either both spouses living beyond the distribution period must be considered. The next phase of this, once we set up what we think the lifespan or the distribution period will be, we need to understand the rates, the sustainable withdrawal rate. We've mentioned that a couple times already. Sustainable withdrawal rates is the amount of money you can distribute without running out of money consistently. So There's a few ways that they study this, and they've done this with every method, everything from 100% equities and no fixed income, all the way to zero equities and 100% fixed income. This is where it gets really interesting. I hope you can see my screen. If not, again, I'll put this link. This is the page. It says here page 69, but I don't think that's right. I think that's missed. I think that's, let's say page 4. It's on page 4. It's first two charts is figures 1 and 2. Let's first say, remember we talked about how much risk you're willing to assume? How much do you want to stay up at night, or how much you will stay up at night depending on market volatility, is one of the leading factors on how do we build this portfolio. If a 10 or 15% drop in your portfolio scares you to death, you're most likely going to want a 5% probability of failure. But if a 20% probability of failure does not scare you because you want to spend more, you're willing to accept more risk, the answers are completely different. So, for example, the best and most consistent withdrawal rates for a 30-year period with a 5% probability of failure or a 95% chance of success is a 60-40 portfolio with a 30-year distribution has a maximum real withdrawal rate of 4.1%. That's a 60-40 portfolio. That means in a lot of cases that you're not going to reduce your assets down along the way. You're going to end up with more or the same amount. And we discussed that in the Morningstar article as well. However, if you wanted to spend more with a 20% probability of failure over 30 years, there's a 5.1% effective withdrawal rate in your portfolio. So you can take a 60-40 portfolio 5.1% out on an over 30-year period with a 20% probability of failure. So you're increasing your withdrawal by 1.1, about 1% per year with a 60-40 portfolio. But here's where this gets interesting. Here's where this gets really interesting. If we go back to figure 1 on the left-hand side, you can see that the 100% equity portfolio is not theoretically the best. If you only want a 5% probability of failure, or you want to end up with more at the end of your life, you didn't utilize as much of your assets. You want to sleep a little bit better at night. You didn't get to distribute as much safely at a 100% equity portfolio. However, if you're willing to assume the potential of a 20% probability of failure and 80% success rate, you were able in a 30-year period to increase your distribution to 5.3%. Even more, if you had a shorter window of time, you were getting close to 6.5% in a 20 to 25 year period distributing from your portfolio. The largest distributions come from a 100% equity portfolio, which you just have to assume more risk and that you might end up with a little bit less at retirement. So let's say you started with $2 million. When you pass away after 30 years, maybe you only have 1.4 million left, or 1.5 or 1.2 or 1.6, something like that. But if you go the 95% chance of success, you'll probably end up with the same amount, 2 million or more. But then you start to ask the question, what am I doing? Why do I want to save that much? And that's up to you and your decisions. So in short, the leading title of this is potentially accurate, where a 100% equity portfolio could work. The annual distribution for these portfolios was assumed to be taken at the beginning of every year. So just one big distribution, which is really, really interesting. One time per year, which is fine. I love that. But according to this research, you can see right here in the center, the best distribution glide path now might be the worst distribution glide path later. We discussed that. What works now may not work later. That's why the dynamic Spain approach and reevaluating this regularly is important. Because what this also discusses is different times to adjust the allocation, the glide path. So say you started at 100% equity, the normal glide path is not 100% equity maybe the first year, 98% equity, 96, 94, 90, all the way down to maybe getting you to 60, 40. So you're reducing the risk or the volatility in the portfolio over time, which is possible, but they factored for that. And I'll let you dive in deeper to there's the constant, there's the linear, which there's a little bit every single year. There's the stair step, which it stays steady for a few years and then drops and stays steady, then drops like stairs. And then there's convex, where the arc works more horizontally and then down as you decrease the glide path. And then concave is there's very aggressive decreases in the beginning and then it slows down later. So there's a lot of different ways to adjust the glide path of the allocation along the way in this research. But it says here, while 100% equity, 0% fixed income constant was the most common optimal distribution glide path, the 0% equity, 100% fixed income constant distribution glide path was not uniquely the best for any of the 43 distribution glide paths. There's a lot of room in here, but the moral of the story is having equities is very important to being able to distribute more in retirement. Like I showed you in the beginning with that right capital or financial plan scenario where I can help have more at the end and spend more with more success if you incorporate more equities into your retirement plan. In addition, this shows having very, very little equities is not the best way to distribute your assets. In fact, you are being too fearful of volatility by incorporating too much bonds, which actually ends up hurting you anyway, because your assets cannot combat inflation effectively and grow to be able to be there long enough. If you live too long, that's called longevity risk. So in short, 100% equities is not a terrible idea, but maybe finding the right situation, the right allocation for your situation is probably the best bet. I hope you enjoyed this. This was a little longer than normal, but there's a lot that goes into these investment portfolios. If you ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Thatcher Taylor, again, is my name, and I own ProPathFinancial.com, and as a certified financial planner, I help clients work through this regularly and am accepting new clients that need really high quality income distribution strategies in retirement. You can reach me at the contact information below. Thanks for watching, and thanks for listening. See you next time.